Well, Peter, thank you so much for joining us here on the Build podcast. It's great to have you on the show.
Great to be here, Blake. Thanks for having me.
So we're talking about hypergrowth today, which is a popular topic perennially for startups, because that's the goal of being in a startup, is to experience hypergrowth. But as many people talk about, it's also difficult. There are many challenges that come along with sustaining hypergrowth, growing through hypergrowth, your org, your team, et cetera. And so that's what we're going to unpack today. And so I'm curious, from your perspective, what makes hypergrowth hard for a startup leader and a team in your experience?
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many dimensions to it. You know, when you're thinking about scaling, it's really, to do it effectively, you have to get all the different components going kind of consistently. You know, you can't have, one particular part of the company is lagging behind the other, and so, you're looking at the orgs, you're looking at your team, you're spending a lot of time, understanding the strengths and weaknesses of the team, and where they can scale, who's got more capacity, who's running out of capacity. You also look at where a lot of companies kind of struggle with is this interdepartment, like when groups start needing more collaboration together, because the businesses just get more complex, and as much as you try to minimize that complexity and try to keep things as simple as you can, invariably they become more complicated. You get into different geos, you get into adding multiple products, you're getting into financial services or federal that requires security check. All these things just add to this massive complexity. Small companies, medium, large, and so you really need to work well together as a team, and making sure that they're all kind of moving at the same time. And so that generates a lot of, for a CEO, it's something your number one job is just watching and kind of seeing where the problems, where we're going to, run into challenges 6 to 9 to 12 months ahead at least, and trying to stay ahead of that. And a lot of times it comes down to people, right? I mean, unfortunately, as you're growing, and the faster you're growing, the faster you're going to outstretch a lot of the people and teams that you have. And so it's your job to kind of assess when you see people struggling, and there's tons of signs of all that happening, but and then you're having these conversations with people along the way. But as you grow, the most frustrating part, I think, for some founders and CEOs are just, what got you to this point is not going to get you to the next and the next. And that's why, you see these companies grow and then plateau, and then they change up and they make all these changes, and then they kind of grow again. And the challenge for any CEO founder is how to anticipate the plateauing before you plateau. And those are all the things, you got to just be looking at, the 20 different things that could go wrong, or the things that your company's going to struggle with, and got to try to get ahead of it as much as you possibly can.
Yeah, this plateaus piece is interesting, because it's very easy when you read a TechCrunch article or an Inc. magazine article, or you hear about a company that just had a massive IPO. It sort of sounds like it was always up and to the right. You look at the annualized numbers, like, wow, that's some pretty great growth. And they did it every year for a handful of years. But that's always obviously a myth. Internally, it is never up and to the right. It's never like you were saying, the strategies that sort of work for you in the very early days aren't what's going to work for you when you're 100 million of ARR and beyond. And so anticipating this idea of plateaus is that, maybe you're kind of sprinting from 1 to 10 million of ARR, and then you hit 10 million, things stop working. And if you don't anticipate that, that's a plateau, and you got to work through it. So sort of understanding that there are these different, break points, if you will, and anticipating that that's where plateaus can happen. That is key. And I see it from as a board member and as an investor, I see it all the time.
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, it's and usually what makes that hard is the time to make those changes are when things are going the best. When the numbers are the best, the metrics are the best, right? And when you're at your best, that's when you should think about, okay, how do I evolve? How do I think differently? How do I look at it and adapt, right? And because sometimes when all the metrics are all solid. Part of that is historic, number one, and two, they may be leading you down the wrong path because you're just, okay, I don't want to screw it up because it's going well, so I'm just going to kind of let things go until they're not, and that's sometimes too far past that time, and so it's just having that read on what do you do, constantly questioning, and asking the teams, the questions about, is the market evolving? Is it changing? What are we hearing? What are the objections? Why are we winning? Why are we losing? What are the problems that we're facing? What could go wrong? All the things, like, it's the team internally at Snyk telling, I'm always the paranoid one. I'm always the one, I always say, Andy Grove used this line, only the paranoid survive, right? And so I'm always looking for what could go wrong. And that's a big part of the CEO's job, to be well out in front, looking for all the things that we may be missing. And that's where the other thing I would say is, that's not the sole responsibility of the CEO or the management team. That's your board of directors, that's your advisors. The worst thing that could ever happen is you miss something because your head was down and you were into the weeds and you didn't see something very obvious and right in front of you that you didn't do. And I am incredibly paranoid that that's something that's going to happen. So I'm always asking people, what am I missing? Here's what's going on. Tell me what I should be doing. So I've been doing this for 30 years and I'm still asking those questions all the time, because it's just some of the easiest and obvious things that are right in front of you that you don't see. And that's that. And you don't see because you're enamored with the results and you think everything is going to go good forever. And that doesn't happen. Then you have to react. And so the hardest thing to do is, when it's all going well, is to change. Because why am I changing? Well, I'm changing because I'm worried that it's not going to keep going. So we have to, do things differently. We have to try different things. And that's really hard for companies to do.
Yeah. So the first takeaway that I have there is, we might want to consider a change of title from CEO to CPO for Chief Paranoia Officer, because that sounds like it's part and parcel to the job. But
well, if that was the case, I think I'd be one of the better ones.
No, number one in the industry. That's great. Yeah, and the image that was coming to mind to me, it's kind of thinking of a sports analogy. One team does a really great play or scores a basket, whatever it is. They're busy celebrating, and then the other team is sort of like moves faster, and then you're like, oh no, what's going on? And you can get caught by surprise. And so, like, when things are going really well, if you're too busy celebrating, if you're too busy high-fiving or patting yourself on the back, that's exactly the moment at which things can change, and you're not paying attention.
Yeah.
And so, so getting into this a little bit, and I think one piece of feedback that you said that was really interesting is that the time to be thinking about these changes, the time to be anticipating plateaus, is when things are going really well, which is counterintuitive. And so maybe unpacking that a little bit, what it sounds like to me is that if you're needing to do this when things are going well, then relying solely on metrics or on KPIs might not be enough of an early warning sign. So what do you look at? Like, how do you get this sense if it's not necessarily the KPIs?
Yeah, it's a lot of these early indicators that kind of tip you off that there's smoke. There's issues that you should start paying attention. There's a little bit of a fire going. You look at group frustrations, like sales and marketing, marketing and product teams, and you start to see these signs of frustration, and the wheels start wobbling because people are frustrated. Decisions aren't being made the way they fast enough, or there's conflict that isn't being resolved. There's this artificial harmony that they're really not talking about the tough problems, or a manager is struggling to hire really good talent, because they're overwhelmed in what they're doing, and I don't have time to hire because I got too many things going. And these are all, it's not usually one thing, it's usually like 3, 4, 5 things that kind of, I'm worried about this part of my business. And then as the CEO, you just start digging in and observing and asking questions, and you get an instinct, and then you gotta, okay, have these conversations with, if let's say it's a particular individual, and say, look, I'm worried about this. Like I'm worried that we're not going to be able to make it to the next level here. Let's talk about it. And then we go and go and go. And over time you mutually come to, hopefully, if you do it ahead of time, that at some point we should think about, reducing your scope from this to this. As companies get bigger, all roles get smaller, and then bring someone else in that does this really well, and that'll save you from trying to be too many things. And it's just this dialogue you have of, anticipating a problem happening and getting in front of it and doing it in a way that people understand it. And if you do it proactively, then it's just, everybody is better. Anybody, a manager is better. The company's better. Everything is better when you do this proactively. And rarely does anybody say, hey, when it comes to people, I did it too fast. It's always the opposite. Holy cow, I should have made this move 6-9 months ago, is usually the case. So if you have an instinct as a CEO or leader, you really got to dig in, get the data points, validate it, and then go as quickly as you can. And it's the crappy part of the job. Like, it's the worst, right? Because it's constant. It's never, okay, I just finished this and I don't have to worry about it forever. No, it's constant.
Yeah.
It's a constant part of the job.
Yeah, definitely. So distilling that down, what I'm taking away from that is, as we were talking about before, if you're waiting for the evidence of a plateau to show up in your KPI sheet or to show up in your bookings number or whatever, and then you see it, it's too late. So that's not the place to look.
Yeah.
So you need to get ahead of that. I need to anticipate even more in advance. And so it looks like the way you're describing it is, instead of looking at those metrics, you're looking at people, and you're looking at the people dynamics, and you're looking at the organizational dynamics. You're trying to identify where is there organizational friction, where is there sort of, within a team or across teams, where is there friction? Where is one team perhaps acting as a bottleneck to another team? All of those types of dynamics, it sounds like, that's viewed as the softer side, but that's actually the more important side. Like, being data driven, so to speak, here actually suggests that you might be a little bit too late to the party. So is that the right way to kind of to parse that out?
It is, but it's not all the people may be the outcome, but usually it's the signs that give that kind of point to that being the case. And you think about, if there's the increase in support calls coming in, or customer dissatisfaction, your NPS is dropping, or your pipeline is dropping, or there's these early indicators of some of the problems that you deal with every day. You mentioned it first. It's kind of, you see what it's like on the outside, but on the inside, you see how the sausage is made. And there's so many of those, early, very, very early indicators that point out to something.
Yeah.
And then when you see enough of them, then it does eventually point to people in a lot of cases. And so, that's why, sometimes people accuse me of too much into the details sometimes, but I think that's what serves me well when you're looking at, how to stay ahead of that growth. I mean, we're growing at 170% year over year. It's hard for an individual to develop themselves fast enough. You got to be 175% better every year, and that's hard, right? And so not everybody can do that or want to do that. And so these conversations on a regular basis are critical for the company to stay ahead. Don't slow down. And when you're growing at that pace, usually what happens is growth outstretches talent, and that's where you hit that plateau. If you don't stay ahead, then you're going to hit a plateau and then start, the decline on the other side.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to put it. Is if your company is growing at a particular rate, 100% year over year, 200% year over year, then effectively each person at the company needs to be getting that much better year over year as well. Otherwise, you're not going to scale with the org. I had never thought about it that way, but that's an unlock for me. I like that.
That's that, and And from a company perspective, you've got to constantly do whatever you can possibly do to develop your talent, because it's so much better to promote from within and bring people in and groom them. It gets much harder when that growth rate gets that high to be able to do that all the time. Some areas you can, in some areas, just by scale, yes, you were doing this job and it was at half of what it is. Now it's double it. So if I reduce the scope to half, it's still, because of scale, so much more than you've ever done. So I think people need to look at, when you're asked to do maybe a lesser scope, it gives you more ability to have that impact and to stay ahead. But as a company, we got to do whatever we can to develop our talent so we don't have to go outside as much, and we can promote from within. But it takes two, right? We got to do everything we can as a company, but the individual, if you're not investing to do it, then the outcome is going to be clear in a period of time.
Yeah, yeah. So if we focus a little bit on the bringing in new people aspect of things, because obviously that is part and parcel to any leader's role, but certainly a CEO role, and that's what we've been talking about right now a lot. But this idea that you're constantly needing to be recruiting and bringing in really great folks, and I think that what I'm hearing from you is that some people can perceive that as, I need to constantly, if I got a VP of sales now, I need to be thinking about who's my next VP of sales, and that might be the right answer. But it doesn't necessarily only need to be through that single lens of replacing somebody. You talked about bringing in specialized talent. So maybe you have a VP of sales today, but we're going to bring in somebody to lead channel and partnerships, or we're going to bring in somebody to lead international. And so that's more so adding to, as opposed to just looking at the single option at your disposal of replacing, right?
Yeah. And part of it is, if you have someone in a certain role that doesn't have a certain skill set, you can hire someone strong in that team to help that person scale. So it doesn't have to, always replace or up level a certain spot. It could be strengthening the team, and that's one of those. That's one of the areas where you kind of see where the wheels start wobbling when they can't recruit really good people on their teams. That's a sign that, okay, if you can't get top talent in your team, then you're only going to go so far, because you're only as good as your team. Right? Whether you're a frontline manager or a second line manager or a third line manager or the CEO, if you can't find amazing talent, then you're going to struggle, because you're only as good as your team. And so for me as the CEO, that's 25% of my time is just constantly looking for talent at all levels, not just reporting to me, at all levels. And especially in this market where resources are getting harder and harder to find, that's got to be, a top priority for the CEO, is just looking for talent. Because they're very specific skill sets today. As you get bigger and people have gone through hypergrowth and $1 billion in revenue, you got to be always be looking for talent. That's the driver. And it doesn't matter if you're the CEO or your frontline sales manager. You're only as good as your team, and if you can't hire top talent, that's usually an indication of you're not scaling.
So if you're constantly bringing in new talent at every layer of leadership within an org, whether that's up-leveling somebody, whether that's replacing somebody, whether that's adding sort of another person, you're kind of dividing a role into two as the org scales, or even, as you mentioned, hiring people below as an enabling role in order for that person to be sort of unlocked or unblocked. So if you're constantly going through that motion, then you obviously have the factor of my current team. And you needing to communicate that with your current team. And you had alluded to it earlier in our conversation about these hard conversations, these difficult conversations with your team. But that communication is incredibly important, because otherwise it'll cause problems down the road. So how do you approach, I guess maybe unpacking this hard conversation piece? What makes them so difficult beyond the obvious of delivering, perhaps bad news or sort of mixed news? And then how do you approach these hard conversations in order to get to where you want to go?
Yeah, well, that is a challenging part of the job, right? It's it's a skill that you kind of learn over the years. And usually it's kind of like two. If you have the conversation late, it's probably not a surprise because the metrics are telling you that the data is there. But if you're doing it ahead of time and you're proactive in doing it and you're having conversations ahead of time, it is a surprise, right? Because it's like, well, all the metrics are there. I'm doing this, this, this. I know, but here's what I'm seeing, and let's just watch it. Let's just watch this. I'm worried, and if we continue down this path, we're probably going to need to reduce the scope or do this or this. I said, no, I just want to be, all the cards on the table, so nobody's ever surprised. And that's a little bit of a shock to someone who's like, why? I'm doing all the metrics say I'm doing what? Well, this is if you in a lot of cases you try to do all this beforehand where the metrics aren't, it doesn't show up yet. And so it's just being, honest. We have this thing, we have a phrase, one of our core values at Snyk is care deeply. And one of the parts of care deeply is everybody, generally cares about each other, and they do. I mean, it's the core part of our values at Snyk. But when I first got here, it was a little bit like, well, but people weren't giving feedback to each other. Like people were afraid because they didn't want to hurt people's feelings. And so I'm like, well, that's not caring deeply. Caring deeply is if you really care about someone, you'll give them feedback, you'll coach them, you'll tell them, and people just couldn't. It's this transition. If you really care about someone, you will give them feedback. You'll talk to them about what's working and what's not. You'll be very transparent, and you build this loyalty and you build this trust that nobody should be surprised at these conversations because you've been doing it over a period of time. And so that's what you try to do. It doesn't always happen that way, but it's the toughest part. And I see I'm on boards and advise founders who've kind of built a company. It's harder. It's hard, right? Because all these people who have been on this journey and scaling and they've been on this together. And then at some point you have to now start having some tougher conversations with people who maybe need a much more narrower scope or a different role. And that's hard to do that. Definitely hard to do it proactively. It's hard to do it reactively. And so, that's, if I can just encourage people to, the more difficult the conversation, you do it ahead of time, have those conversations. And if you really care about them, you'll tell them what you feel, and that's only going to help them and help the company as well.
Yeah, one thing that you said there that I had not really thought about before, but it is so true now hearing you say it, is this idea that, again, if you're anticipating the plateau, if you're anticipating the slowdown, then that means that you're anticipating it before it gets bad, before the metrics, it shows up in the metrics, as we were saying before. So then if you combine that then with having proactive conversations ahead of the curve, then you're having a conversation when a difficult conversation when things look good. And so that can be a surprise. Like, wait, where's this coming from? Look at my KPIs. I'm doing really well. I'm hitting all my OKRs. But again, you're sort of thinking about, well, I'm not thinking about today. I'm thinking about a year from now. I'm thinking about 2 years from now.
Yes.
And we need to make sure that this is the right setup for a year or 2 years from now. And that's what I'm focused on. So that idea of, it could be a surprise, and that leads to a lot of people avoiding it. They're like, why would I do that? Like, if I don't have to? That sounds terrible. That sounds like miserable. Just like do it later and hope that it just resolves itself, right? That's the usual response that I see.
Yes, and that's that's the job of the CEO. That's why they say it's it's a lonely spot. It's tough because you're there making tough decisions for the best that are the best interest of the company is a year, 2, 3 years down the road, and that's it's definitely a lot of times not the most popular decision. And, sometimes, people, don't understand all the dynamics because you don't explain, you can't necessarily explain all the rationale for why something is done because it's just, it's between an individual. And so, I think that's where I think one of the core tenets of any leader or any person in a company is just trust. They have to trust the people they're working with, both me trusting them trusting me, and that you know that you're not doing it for any other reason than to help strengthen the company,
Yeah.
right? And it's not for political or not a popularity contest. It's just to do what's right for the business long term, and that helps everybody,
Yeah.
right? And so, and I think sometimes people think, well, why are you picking on me, or why it's you're not. You're doing for what you think is the right moves to make for the business, and those are the tough decisions you got to make.
So if I take a step back and put my my philosopher's hat on a little bit here, I've been very personally focused on this idea of, you can't avoid pain in life and business and anything. You can't avoid difficulty, um,
Yeah.
but there is a choice of, do you voluntarily embrace pain of your own chosen flavor, or do you sort of wait and have the unchosen, involuntary pain catch up with you later? And I think that there can be
Mm.
this, there is this myth, and I think we all fall prey to it, is that if I don't embrace the voluntary pain and just pretend like it's not there and do the ostrich strategy and put my head in the ground, it will go
Yeah.
away and it will get better. And it doesn't. You're
Yeah. Yeah.
just forestalling
No.
and delaying the pain. And you can choose to
Yes.
have a hard conversation before it's difficult, before things are breaking, and it's a little bit of a surprise, but you're doing it in a caring deeply manner. You're doing it in a proactive manner. You're choosing the pain of a difficult
Yeah.
conversation well ahead of the curve. Or you could wait and wait for everything to be falling apart. And it's like, this person's got to go tomorrow. And I've never told or
Yeah.
telegraphed that at all. And now I'm having that conversation. That's very,
Yeah.
very painful and not a great experience for either person. And so, which flavor of pain do you
No.
want? And then against the organizational backdrop, what has happened to that team? What has happened to the numbers? What has happened
Yeah.
to the performance in that interim while you were playing
That.
ostrich?
Yes. Yeah. It's a great observation, and it's totally true. I mean, we have this, we use this phrase, kind of ripping the Band-Aid off, like taking, anything you think is a tough experience, a tough decision, a tough, restructuring. Just do it as quickly as you can. Get it behind you. When people come to me with org things and changes, and I'm thinking of they're doing this in 6 months, I'm doing it. Why are you doing it in 6 months? Well, by then I'll be there. I said, why wouldn't you just do it now? Get it out of the way, get it clear behind you. And it's just, I think it's, people, I just think react better to it as you're being more, more proactive and thinking about things and getting the bad stuff behind to get to a better place. And, instead of it dragging these things out and making more pain and, the symptoms of all that throughout the organization, rip the Band-Aid off, move forward, make the moves, and just get to a better place as quickly as you can. That could be people or systems or process or whatever it is. You rarely does it benefit you by delaying and dragging it out.
So, in closing here, Peter, if we have founders listening right now, and I'm sure there are plenty who are thinking, "Uh-oh, that sounds like something that's very difficult, and also that's something that I might not be wired towards. I don't know if I'm cut out for that. I don't know if I want to do that, but it sounds like it's pretty necessary for my business." What kind of advice do you have for somebody that's feeling that right now?
Yeah, and I don't think that's solely the founder's challenge. I think most people don't like doing it. Like that's just that's it's like if anybody says they like doing it, then they're not human. So just
Masochist.
that aside, so I do think that a big part of a founder's job or founder CEO's job is to have these difficult conversations and to see things ahead of time and make these proactive moves. And that's not for everybody. And at some point, if you don't do them, it'll catch up to you. And so I've been now CEO of four companies, but three of them were there before, including Snyk. The founder has been a friend of mine for 18 years, and he asked me to come in and do it. And we've had a lot of conversations beforehand, and he said, look at, the company's at a point where we've got to do some different things, and things that I don't like to do and I'm not great at, but I really like to do this stuff. And so he came to me and asked for my help along the way, and then said, hey, can you come in and run? And we had that conversation because he recognized that he had strength, and amazing strength. He also knew me and knew what I was, that I complimented him really well. And that's kind of would be my message to founders, that you're going to have things that you're really good at and things that you really like to do, and you're really going to look at, okay, can that keep the company going, or am I going to need someone who can do the things that the company needs and I don't want to do, and do it proactively. That's challenge. Like, some people will say, no, I got to be the CEO and I'm going to go hire a COO. That's kind of like, I would never, like, a good CEO would never go to be a COO, because it's just the moves and the things that you need to do, you got to kind of be free to do all the things that you need to do and have these tough conversations and do it without the distraction of someone coming in and telling you, well, you can't do that. Well, that's the challenge. So for a CEO, I would say, for a founder coming in, just understand what you're good at and what you're not. Understand how far you could go in the company, and just be proactive. If that's not for you, if you're tending to do more of the things you don't like versus the things you do like, that's probably a good indication where you need to start thinking of making a move proactively yourself versus waiting for it to happen to you.
So you can't opt out, but you can phone a friend. So that's a really helpful advice, and a great place.
You can't opt out, but you can phone a friend. That's it. That's a good way to look at it.
Well, I think that's a really great place to leave it. So thanks so much, Peter, for joining us here on the Build Podcast. It's been a great conversation, and I'm sure very impactful for our audience.
It's great talking to you, Blake. Thank you.